The grand ballroom of the Langford Royal Hotel, nestled in the heart of Manhattan, shimmered under crystal chandeliers as if the space itself had been gilded in gold. It was New York's most anticipated tech charity gala, and the room pulsed with quiet luxury. Silk gowns swept across polished marble. Tuxedos gleamed, and champagne flutes clinked with the rhythm of polite conversation and practiced laughter. Slightly removed from the crowd, Ethan Langford, founder and CEO of Langford Innovations, leaned casually against the mezzanine railing, observing the scene in silence. At 36, he was one of America's youngest tech moguls, but preferred to stay in the shadows of his success. Tonight, he wore a midnight blue Tom Ford tuxedo, paired with a crisp white Zegna shirt and polished Berluti shoes that gleamed with understated opulence. Every detail was deliberate, simple, timeless, and undeniably elite. His sharp jawline and quiet, assessing gaze drew more than one look of curiosity. He didn't appear to crave attention, but somehow commanded it without effort. Down below, Isabel Moreno, an event coordinator with Stellar Events, moved swiftly through the crowd with her tablet in hand. Dressed in the sleek black dress, minimalist, functional, elegant, she radiated quiet focus. She wasn't here to admire the decor. Lighting cues, menu timing, guest list cross-checks, all of it lived in her mind like code. "Champagne refill for table 7, she said to a passing server, eyes still glued to her checklist. Then, turning quickly to check the mic setup near the stage, she collided hard into someone. Her hand jerked, and the champagne glass tipped completely forward, emptying across a man's tailored tuxedo. She froze, stomach lurching. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Isabel gasped, voice cracking with panic. She looked up, straight into the eyes of Ethan Langford, the most high-profile, notoriously perfectionist guest of the evening. To Isabel's surprise, Ethan Langford didn't get angry. He looked down at the spreading stain on his fine tuxedo, then raised his gaze, calm, almost unreadable. "It's all right," he said in a deep, composed voice. Isabel felt her heart drop to her knees. She fumbled in her clutch for tissues, her hands trembling. "I'm so sorry. I can help clean it. We have an emergency kit backstage for situations like this." Ethan didn't glare or scoff. Instead, he watched her with a strange softness, a quiet curiosity, like he was seeing something rare in a world that rarely surprised him. "If you don't mind," he nodded, "lead the way." The door to the luxury suite closed quietly behind them, shutting out the noise of the gala. Isabel walked quickly toward the minibar, retrieving the emergency stain removal kit. Small, discreet, containing microfiber cloths, high-end cleaning solution, and a soft brush. Her hands still trembled slightly as she reached for the fabric of the tuxedo. "Excuse me," she murmured, avoiding his eyes. Ethan gave a small nod, standing perfectly still. She bent down, working with practiced precision, her brow furrowed in focus, hands moving swiftly, the kind of efficiency that came from years of handling high-pressure events. Ethan watched her. He should have been furious. The tuxedo wasn't just expensive, it was custom, made for this very evening. But anger didn't come. Instead, something about her steadied him. Strange, but real. "Are you always this calm during a crisis?" he asked, breaking the silence. "Only when I have to be," she replied without looking up. "Though I admit, soaking the most important guest of the night isn't exactly my proudest moment." He chuckled, a low, genuine sound, the first real smile on his face that evening. It transformed his sharp features into something far more human. "What's your name?" he asked. "Isabel. Isabel Moreno?" "Isabel," he repeated, like trying her name on his lips. "I'm Ethan." "I know," she replied, finally meeting his eyes. "Everyone in New York does." Their eyes locked. For a moment, the world fell away. No music, no ballroom, just a quiet room, a disappearing stain, and a space between two people, slowly becoming aware of each other's presence. "It's nearly gone," she said, rising. He glanced at the tuxedo. "Pristine. Impressive. You're good at impossible situations." "Part of the job," she smiled faintly. After the event, "Would you join me for a drink?" he asked, sounding surprised by his own question. Isabel's eyes widened. "I don't think that's appropriate. I'm working." "When the event's over," he added, eyes fixed on hers. "Just one drink." A pause. Then she nodded. "One drink." She wasn't sure what made her nod, his calm gaze, or the quiet sense that beneath his polished exterior was a man far too familiar with loneliness. Whatever it was, she reasoned, one drink couldn't hurt. At least, that's what she told herself. The rooftop bar of the Langford Royal Hotel felt like a quiet threshold between two worlds, the glittering world of the elite below and the untold stories that lived in silence. Warm golden light cast soft reflections onto glassware and dark wood. Ethan sat alone at the far corner, a glass of untouched whiskey before him, his eyes fixed on the glittering skyline of Manhattan. Isabel arrived slightly late. Her steps were careful, a strange tightness in her chest she couldn't explain. Ethan turned as he heard her approach, his lips curling into a subtle, unreadable smile. "You came," he said quietly, as though it had been inevitable. "Just one drink," she replied, half teasing as she took the seat across from him. At first, their words were formal, polite comments about the event, her work, his speech. But slowly something shifted. The conversation deepened, softened. His voice dropped. Hers grew less guarded, like two people gradually letting their truth step forward from behind well-built walls. Ethan spoke of his childhood, growing up with his mother after losing his father early, about chasing success like it was oxygen. "I spent my entire youth building an empire," he said, his fingers trailing along the rim of his glass. "Then one day I realized I had never really lived." Isabel paused, letting the weight of that sentence settle between them. She'd never imagined a man like him, wealthy, brilliant, respected, carried such emptiness. "And you?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. "Anyone waiting for you tonight?" She smiled faintly. "No one. Maybe because I've always been too busy, or maybe because I'm too afraid to be left behind." The space between them began to close. The air grew warmer, denser. Her hands had stopped fidgeting. His eyes had softened. Then came the silence. And from it, Ethan's voice again, lower, quieter. "I can't have children." The words dropped like stones in still water. "A climbing accident when I was 27. My pelvis was badly injured. The doctors called it irreversible infertility." He let out a bitter laugh. "The irony is, I thought I didn't want a family. Then, when I was told I couldn't have one, I realized I'd always hoped." Isabel said nothing for a moment, just held his gaze. There was no judgment in her eyes, only quiet empathy. "Thank you for telling me," she said gently. The silence that followed was different, warm, full of things neither of them needed to say. So when Ethan leaned slightly closer and Isabel met him halfway, their kiss felt inevitable. It was not rushed, not desperate. It was acknowledgement of yearning, of loneliness, of two strangers finding something painfully familiar in each other. The kiss deepened, slow, reverent, full of unspoken things. That night they didn't speak much, only soft touches, lingering glances, quiet whispers that felt like half prayers. There were no promises, no assumptions, just the now, intimate and inexplicably right. By morning, sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, painting the suite in quiet gold. Ethan had risen early. He dressed in silence, sitting at the edge of the bed for a moment, watching her sleep. Her face looked more peaceful than anything he'd seen in years. His phone vibrated just as he reached for his cufflinks. Emergency cybersecurity breach, Langford Innovations Singapore branch, global data risk. He had to fly out immediately. Isabel stirred at the sound of the door closing. By the time she sat up, the suite was empty again. But on the vanity, neatly placed beneath a room service notepad, was a handwritten note in strong, deliberate handwriting. "I'll find you again." Isabel returned to her small apartment the next morning, her mind still drifting somewhere between the rooftop bar and the whispered things in the dark. It had only been one night, but what happened between her and Ethan felt carved into her in ways nothing else had before. She brewed a cup of coffee and told herself it was just a moment, beautiful but fleeting. Ethan had left, just as she knew he would, and she expected nothing more. But the days that followed didn't return to normal. She was distracted, unfocused. Her eyes drifted to her phone more often than she cared to admit, hoping for a message, an email, anything. Nothing came. She searched for his name in news articles and found that he truly was in Singapore, facing a major cybersecurity crisis. Headlines highlighted the scale of the breach, stock values plummeting. Ethan Langford personally leading containment. At least, he wasn't lying, she thought, with a quiet ache. Week 2 passed. Then week 3. Isabel forced herself back into her rhythm, work, night classes, solo evenings. She didn't let herself fantasize. Until one morning, she woke with a wave of dizziness and sudden nausea. At first, she blamed empty stomach coffee, then stress. But as the morning sickness returned again and again, doubt crept into her heart like a slow, cold fog. "This can't be," she whispered, holding a pregnancy test box she'd bought from a pharmacy far from her neighborhood to avoid curious eyes. She sat on the bathroom floor, hands shaking as she followed the instructions. 3 minutes felt like a lifetime. Then came the second line, clear as day. Isabel nearly collapsed against the tub, breath catching. She checked again and again, with a second, then a third brand. Every test showed the same result. She was pregnant. Her heart raced, not from joy, but confusion, because Ethan had been certain, he had told her clearly, he couldn't have children, a medical diagnosis, and she'd believed him, felt the truth of it in his voice. So then, what was really happening? Isabel sat alone in her dim apartment, the soft glow of a bedside lamp casting faint shadows on the curtains. The pregnancy tests lay on the table like quiet, undeniable proof. She had cried, just a little, not out of regret, but fear. There was too much she didn't know, too much that could go wrong. Should she try to find him? Part of her wanted to, but then reality sank in. Ethan had disappeared without a word, without a way to reach him. They hadn't exchanged numbers, no email, not even full names beyond what the media already knew. And even if she did find him, what then? Who would believe her? A man diagnosed with infertility, now being told by a stranger that he was about to become a father? She shook her head. No, she couldn't begin this journey with doubt hanging over her. She would keep the child and raise it on her own. Not because she didn't want him involved, but because she refused to let her child's worth be questioned by anyone. 4 years passed faster than Isabel expected. Her life now revolved around 2 little boys, Leo and Miles, twin brothers with dark hair and bright, matching eyes. To strangers, they were identical, but to Isabel, every expression, every laugh, every sigh was uniquely theirs and wholly hers. She was no longer the flustered girl in the simple black dress at the Langford Royal Hotel. Now she was a mother, stronger, sharper, and more grounded than ever. She worked for an events agency, attended university classes at night, and raised her sons with relentless love and quiet resilience. That Sunday morning, Central Park was wrapped in spring sunlight. Leo and Miles raced through the playground, their laughter cutting through the distant sounds of birdsong and carriage wheels. Isabel sat on a bench nearby, a book resting open in her lap, though her eyes never strayed far from the boys. Not far away, Ethan Langford strolled alone, hands tucked into his coat pockets, gaze distant. He had returned to New York just weeks earlier after more than 3 years overseeing operations in Asia. His career was thriving, his name on every list of power and innovation. Yet inside, there was still emptiness. He didn't know why he turned toward the playground. Maybe it was the sound of laughter, maybe something else. And then he saw them. 2 boys, identical, playing on a slide. Their hair, their movements, the way they smiled. He frowned, frozen, His heart kicked in his chest. Then his eyes found her. Isabel? She sat on a bench, watching the children, a softness in her gaze that nearly undid him. Her hair was shorter, her presence quieter, but it was her. There was no mistake. He froze, not knowing whether to walk toward her, not knowing if she'd recognize him, or worse, if she did. And then one of the boys ran up to her, calling out, "Mommy, I'm thirsty." "Mommy." The word hit Ethan like a thunderclap. He looked again at the boys. He did the math. Their age, their faces, every detail clicked into place. There was no doubt, and so he stepped forward. Isabel had never truly imagined this day. She had often wondered, if Ethan were to appear again, how would she react? With anger, with indifference, or with that fragile calmness one learns after too many sleepless nights. But now, with him standing just a few steps away, eyes burning through the space between them, what she felt was emptiness. She had spent too long learning how to let him go, too many months relearning how to breathe on her own, and yet here he was, and with a single glance, everything she'd buried came rushing back. Ethan didn't speak at first. They just stood there, as if the world around them had gone silent, leaving only the two of them and a truth that had been waiting too long to be spoken. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely holding. "Isabel," he replied, hoarse, eyes locked to hers. Miles and Leo ran over, curiosity in their wide eyes. "Who's that, Mommy?" Leo asked, tugging at her hand. Isabel hesitated, then forced the words out. "Just an old friend." She saw Ethan's gaze shift to the boys. It hit him immediately, their faces, their posture, the unspoken familiarity. His expression tightened, then fell into something unreadable. "They mine, aren't they?" he asked, though he already knew. Isabel nodded. "They'll be 4 next month." Ethan closed his eyes, like bracing for impact. "But I can't have children. The doctors?" "I know," she interrupted gently. "And I never doubted you. I wasn't with anyone else, not once. Ethan, I understand how this sounds, but they are yours." He bent his head, his hands clenched. The silence that followed was the heaviest thing she had carried in years, not because she feared rejection, but because this was it, the moment the secret she had kept so fiercely was finally spoken aloud. In that silence, she felt pain, because part of her had hoped, naively, that he would look at them and just know, that he would see their faces and feel it instantly. But life didn't work like that. Real life was slower, messier, harder. And still, she felt a strange relief, because it was finally out, because the truth had a voice now, and it wasn't hers alone to carry anymore. "I need a test," Ethan said at last, "not because I don't trust you, but because I need to face it. I need to understand." She nodded, firmly this time. "All right, if that's what it takes, we'll do it." They stood in the middle of the park, where spring laughter echoed and sunlight danced over the trees, but between them, a quiet storm stirred, of memory, pain, and the fragile beginning of something new. The paternity test left no room for doubt. Ethan Langford was the biological father of Leo and Miles. Isabel sat across from him in the quiet consultation room of a private clinic. On the table lay a thin folder, but for them it was a document that reshaped everything they thought they knew. Past and future alike. Ethan didn't speak right away. He stared at his name printed beside the word father, confirmed. "They're mine," he said at last, voice clear and steady. "They really are." Isabel nodded gently. Her eyes shimmered with emotion, but she didn't cry, not this time. She had shed enough tears in the past 4 years. In the days that followed, Ethan began showing up more often, first for short park visits, then ice cream trips, reading time, and museum outings. Leo was more cautious, but Miles clung to him from the first moment Ethan knelt to tie his shoelaces. Isabel watched from a distance. She didn't interfere. She let it unfold slowly at its own rhythm. Ethan tried, awkwardly but sincerely. He asked Isabel little things, what the boys liked to eat, their allergies, sleep habits, whether they were afraid of the dark. Every question caught in Isabel's throat. Because she saw it, he was trying not to lose a single moment more. One afternoon, as the sun painted golden light over the boys' heads, Ethan sat cross-legged on the grass. Miles lay against his chest. Leo rested against his shoulder. Ethan looked up at Isabel, who stood nearby, her eyes red at the corners. "I don't know if I deserve this," he said, voice unsteady, "but I'm going to try, every day." Isabel stepped closer, then sat beside him. She didn't speak. Instead, she reached out and gently touched his hand. A simple touch, just enough to say, "You don't have to be perfect, just stay." Ethan didn't rush. He didn't press for answers, didn't demand clarity. He simply stayed, patient and still, as if he understood that healing something once broken didn't require declarations, but rather presence that doesn't retreat. He began showing up every day, sometimes with breakfast before Isabel left for work, sometimes picking the boys up from their art class. Every gesture was small, yet thoughtful and intentional. Nothing grand, nothing performative, just quiet, steady proof that he wanted to be there. Not just for the children, but for her. She didn't say it aloud, but her heart began to stir a little every time he smiled at Leo, every time he gently wiped Miles's mouth after lunch, or when he sat for hours building puzzles without once checking the phone buzzing in his jacket. One warm evening, after the boys had fallen asleep, Ethan stood at the kitchen doorway, holding 2 cups of tea. "Can I take you to dinner?" he asked, looking her straight in the eyes, not avoiding the weight of the moment. Isabel didn't respond right away. She took the cup from him, their hands brushing briefly, then turned her gaze toward the window, where the city lights flickered like old memories not yet settled. "Ethan, I don't know if I can start again," she said softly. "I'm not sure I know how to love the right way," he replied, hesitant. "But I know I want to learn. With you." A gentle silence filled the room, not of distance, but of quiet understanding. Finally, Isabel nodded. "Tomorrow night. But don't bring flowers. I don't need cliches. I need something real." He smiled, not dazzling, but deep enough to make her heart ache. They went to a small restaurant in Brooklyn, a place Isabel had once visited alone while pregnant, imagining the man she loved ordering dinner for both of them. Now, it was happening. Imperfect, but real. Ethan shared stories from his years abroad, of the emptiness that came despite success. Isabel told him about sleepless nights, about the first time the boys called her mom, and about the quiet grief she'd learned to hide behind every smile. By the end of the evening, as they stepped out under the soft glow of street lamps, Ethan reached for her hand. No pressure, no words. And Isabel, after a breath's hesitation, didn't let go. The little restaurant was only the beginning. As they stepped outside, Isabel didn't want to go home yet. There were still things left unsaid, and Ethan, too, looked like he had more to give. "Walk with me?" he asked, his hand still in hers, not tightly but with quiet certainty. They wandered through a park nearby, beneath old trees draped in soft yellow light. Street lamps spilled warm halos onto the cobblestone path, casting long shadows and a sense of something timeless. There was no more distance between them, just a conversation that flowed with the rhythm of their steps. They spoke of childhood, Isabel growing up in a small apartment with a mother who worked long hours as a seamstress and a father who left too soon. Ethan, the boy who learned early how to wear a name like Langford like a suit of armor, pressed, polished, and heavy. "I used to think people with power were the happiest," Isabel said quietly. "Then I met you, and I realized there are kinds of loneliness money can't touch." Ethan chuckled softly, but there was more in his voice than amusement. "I used to believe that too," he said. "Then I lost you. And I knew, if you have no one to share everything with, then none of it matters." She looked at him, eyes glimmering beneath the park's golden light. "So? Did you ever forget me?" He stopped walking. The wind moved through the branches like it, too, was waiting. "Not once," Ethan said, voice low but certain. "Not a single day." Isabel didn't answer. She stepped forward, and under the hush of the street lamps, surrounded by the stillness of a late evening, they kissed. Not with urgency or surprise, but with clarity, forgiveness, and intention. They had found each other again, not through passion sparked by chance, but through all the real things: pain, loss, patience, and a love slowly rebuilt from the pieces of the past. A few months after their first real date, Ethan made a decision that sent ripples through the financial world. He stepped down from his role at Langford Innovations, handing over the reins to his trusted leadership team. The official statement was simple: to spend more time with family. But Isabel knew it wasn't just time he was offering. It was a choice. His way of saying, "I'm here, and I'm not leaving." He began taking Leo and Miles to school every morning, picking them up in the afternoon, cooking, often messily with Isabel, reading bedtime stories, and filling their small apartment with laughter and quiet presence. One evening, after the boys had gone to bed and the kitchen lights glowed warm and low, Ethan placed a folder in front of Isabel. "I want to buy us a house," he said plainly. "Not huge, just enough. With a yard, near the park." Isabel looked at him, silent. "It's not about debt. It's about giving the boys a place they can truly call home." Her heart clenched. She had lived so long within her means, built a life on independence. If she had raised 2 boys alone for 4 years, she didn't need anyone to finish the job. Love, she once believed, should never cost her self-worth. "Ethan, I don't want to live somewhere that makes me feel like a guest," she said softly. He nodded. "Then be a co-owner. The deed will have both our names. If you ever want to walk away, you'll have that choice." There was no pressure in his voice, only permission and trust. Weeks later, Isabel said yes. Not because he convinced her, but because, for the first time, she saw a future that didn't feel hollow, with him beside her and 2 children running through a sunlit yard. Their first morning in the new home, Leo and Miles ran circles around the living room, laughing, pulling their parents into a castle adventure. Isabel looked at Ethan, the man who once existed in only a single night. Now, he was here, fully, truly. And she knew, sometimes, a family doesn't begin the traditional way. It only needs enough love to carry it forward. 2 years passed. Leo and Miles were now 6, lively, curious, and full of odd little questions that somehow made perfect sense in the way only children could manage. They loved books, built towering Lego cities, and often fought over who got to sit in Ethan's lap during bedtime stories. Isabel remained strong, but she was no longer alone. She had launched her own event planning company. It was small but deeply personal and quickly building a strong reputation. She poured her heart into it, yet never at the expense of time with her family, something she once thought was impossible. Ethan, after stepping away from boardrooms and high-stakes deals, began a different kind of journey. He founded the Phoenix Fund, a nonprofit supporting single mothers with startup ideas, especially in creative and educational fields. "I used to think you had to reach the top to be successful," Ethan told Isabel one afternoon as the family cleaned up their backyard. "Now, I think success is just waking up each day and knowing why you're here." Isabel smiled, not needing to reply. She understood. They no longer needed promises. Every day they chose each other again, not out of fear, but from the quiet knowing that being together was worth it. Their life wasn't flashy, but it was full. Dinners shared around the table, weekend road trips, bedtime stories, and backyard gardening. It was the kind of life that looked ordinary but felt miraculous. One late summer evening, the family sat under the backyard pergola, fairy lights casting a warm glow. Leo and Miles were drawing pictures of our family: a house, 2 boys, a mother with long brown hair, and a father in a suit, watering flowers. Ethan leaned in and kissed Isabel's forehead. "See? We did it." She squeezed his hand gently and replied, "We chose to keep going, and this time, We did it together. It was a quiet autumn afternoon, the sunlight falling softly across the backyard lawn. Today marked exactly 2 years since they had met again in Central Park. No parties, no cake, just the four of them, a family, and a love that no longer needed noise to feel real. As the boys ran around laughing, Ethan approached Isabel, holding a small, velvet-wrapped box. "For you," he said, his voice as gentle as it had been the first time she heard it. Isabel opened it, then froze. Inside lay a white silk handkerchief, delicately embroidered, the same one she had dropped years ago in that hotel lobby, the very first thing that had brought them together. "I kept it all this time," Ethan said softly, "because I promised I'd find you again." She didn't speak. She simply reached out, touched the edge of the cloth, and then took his hand in hers. Ahead of them, Leo and Miles tumbled in laughter under the sun, cheeks pink, hair a mess. Isabel leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder. Together, they watched the future they'd fought for unfold. And in that quiet moment, they understood. Sometimes, one fleeting night can lead to an entire lifetime. A promise, once almost lost, now fully kept.